Beneath the glittering facade of wide streets and brightly lit buildings, Oklahoma hides one of the most dire social crises in modern America. The reality lies in the sprawling tent encampments, the neighborhoods that even maps miss. This is what happens when a city hides its pain behind a clean facade for tourists. Let's look at Oklahoma, not through rose-colored glasses, not through glossy news reports, just the hard truth.
Number 1.
Social whitening in Oklahoma City. Silence is sometimes the loudest thing. The streets leading into the glitzy financial district now run past sprawling tent encampments, where the city's ugliest stories are sewn together amid cracked earth and old tarps. In this landscape, scandals about power money and human rights have left Oklahomans with no sense of surprise, only callousness. In 2024, news that a $2 million federal grant meant for emergency housing programs had been misused sent shockwaves through the community. Reports showed that much of the money went to inexperienced contractors, many projects were overpriced, and that the number of homeless people who actually received assistance was almost zero. But the financial scandal was only the beginning. In September of that year, Tulsa police shot a homeless man in the middle of Central Park, sending the crisis spiraling out of the reach of local media. International human rights organizations condemned the incident, describing it as a prime example of law enforcement's incompetence or willful indifference in dealing with vulnerable communities. While the investigations are still in progress on other streets, the story of the growing number of tent cities has become the center of direct conflict between residents and authorities. Tulsa has seen its tent encampments swell by 40% in just 2 years. Oklahoma City has faced a situation where uncontrolled encampments of public land have become uncontrolled hotspots. Areas like the jungle and abandoned riverside area have become gathering places for hundreds of homeless people living without clean water, without basic medical care, and completely isolated from official support centers. Stories from the jungle quickly spread across social media and newspapers, but are often dismissed or ignored by city officials. Not long after Oklahoma City was criticized after announcing plans to build a homeless-free zone, a safe zone designed to clean up the downtown area, rebuilding the image of a clean city. Observers likened this policy to an attempt to whitewash the image of the heart of the city by erasing the presence of real people, real lives, just because they were not pleasing to investors. The phrase social whitewashing became a hashtag that spread rapidly, reflecting the simmering anger in the community. What happens to a city when it turns its back on its dark side? Oklahoma seems to be the most obvious answer. Forgetting becomes routine. Pain is masked under a veneer of calm. The scariest thing is not the tent encampments or new ghost towns that spring up, but the fact that the people who live in them begin to accept these scenes as part of the new normal. What is behind that indifference? The invisible laws, policies, and judgments that turn people into moving stains. These scandals did not erupt out of nowhere, nor were they one-off incidents. They were the product of a system that has grown accustomed to pushing the vulnerable out of sight and then using the law to erect invisible walls. To understand how Oklahoma got to this point, it is necessary to look closely at the laws that were passed and the regulations that were signed, gradually turning the crisis into something manageable on paper, but leaving thousands of people behind in real life.
Number 2.
The injustice of the law. When a city begins to treat homelessness as a public safety problem rather than a human problem, moral lines begin to blur. In Oklahoma, that picture is no longer a warning but a reality painted clearly on every page of legal documents. After scandals have been exposed, new policies have emerged like cold sentences. In June 2024, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling allowing states to decide whether to ban sleeping overnight in public spaces. It didn't take long for Oklahoma to turn this into a political tool. The Oklahoma City City Council quickly tightened the rules, making homeless people subject to arrest, fines, and constant raids. If you thought the law was a shield for justice, Oklahoma will make you question it. SB 484, proposed in late 2024, would ban shelters within 3,000 feet of schools in cities with populations under 300,000. In theory, the goal is to protect students from dangerous environments. In practice, it would virtually eliminate the ability to set up shelters in the most underserved areas. At hearings, human rights groups pointed out that the bill was based not on specific risk data, but on fear and pressure from local communities. For many Oklahomans, these regulations are like building invisible walls around vulnerable communities. The more you look at a map of Oklahoma, the more stark the divide becomes. Inner-city counties tighten their criminalization policies, while outer counties lack the resources to build housing solutions. As a result, homeless people are pushed from the center to the periphery, where they remain marginalized by formal support systems. Some charities liken the situation to a giant game of tag, where the most vulnerable never stand a chance. It's not hard to see the familiarity of the Oklahoma model. It's similar to what some big cities have tried, San Francisco, Los Angeles, but in Oklahoma, it's gone further by the lack of strong public housing programs to counterbalance it. Without a robust safety net, without a broad mental health model, Oklahoma's homeless are being pushed straight from the street to jail. Criminalizing homelessness here is not just a temporary fix. It has become a systemic policy. From 2024 to early 2025, there were more than 200 homeless arrests in Oklahoma City. Those arrested often find themselves in a vicious cycle, fined unable to pay the fine, arrested again. Their record deteriorated, their access to housing diminished. Many describe it as a life sentence without parole. From its legal foundation, Oklahoma has built a social hell where invisible people exist amid real laws. That's what makes the crisis here so unique, and what makes Oklahoma's story a cautionary tale for other cities. And while the laws are used as tools, Oklahoma's history and culture act as the catalyst that speeds up the machine. It all starts with distorted legacies, buried collective memories. Understanding that is the only way to understand why Oklahoma has become the pilot for America's most brutal model of social exclusion.
Number 3.
Oklahoma history and culture. Oklahoma's homeless crisis is not just a result of modern policy decisions. The social rifts here date back hundreds of years to when Oklahoma was never legally mapped as a state. In 1889, the infamous Land Run kicked off the largest wave of land grabs in American history. Thousands of migrants poured onto Native American lands with a simple stipulation: whoever staked out the land first would own it. The event is taught in history classes as a hallmark of pioneering spirit, but for Native Americans, it was the beginning of a long line of injustice. From forced occupation, Native Americans were pushed to areas with few resources, becoming marginalized communities on their ancestral lands. To this day, Oklahoma's 39 recognized tribes still suffer from poverty rates higher than the national average. The stolen legacy is not just land, but control over one's own destiny and access to basic social support systems. Oklahoma was once the place where a bloody memory was buried, the 1921 Tulsa Massacre. Black Wall Street, once the most prosperous black community in America, was burned down overnight. More than 300 people died, thousands of families lost everything, the community economy was wiped out. Also, overnight, everything was engulfed in silence that lasted nearly 100 years, as if nothing had ever happened. Today, Oklahoma's tent encampments still bear a semblance of that tragedy. Native people set up tents on ancestral land, but they are no longer the owners. They live in the heart of society, but become invisible new ghost towns springing up right in the middle of crowded cities. Seeing that, who doesn't wonder, how did a community that was once the economic heart of the country become a forgotten shadow in just a century? What's remarkable is that those same legacies are shaping how Oklahomans respond to the current crisis. Many grew up in communities that were once oppressed, and now they choose to look the other way as the government takes heavy-handed measures. That apathy is no accident. It's the psychological legacy of a place that has seen the most brutal injustices go unpunished. This repetition is even more evident when looking at the current numbers and trends. The numbers don't lie. They paint a picture that many Oklahomans don't want to see but can no longer avoid.
Number 4.
Crisis ignorant. Regardless of who is debating the causes or solutions, the numbers from Oklahoma over the past 2 years do not leave much room for optimism. According to the 2024 point-in-time count report, 4,500 homeless people were recorded in a single night across the state. A third of them were children. That represents a 20% increase from 2023, far exceeding the national average of just 18%. Oklahoma City alone accounts for more than 60% of the state's homeless population, while Tulsa accounts for nearly 30%. Behind the official figures lie hidden numbers that are obscured by survey limitations. Independent organizations like the Homeless Alliance estimate the true number of homeless people could be as high as 8,000 to 10,000, including people living in cars, unregistered shelters, and spontaneous camps that authorities cleared before survey teams arrived. Areas like the jungle, once described as the city's largest tent encampment, have seen their population increase by 40% in just 2 years. One particularly dangerous trend is the sharp increase in child homelessness. In Tulsa, the number of children and teens experiencing homelessness increased by 50% from 2022 to 2024. Many come from families facing eviction due to rent arrears, a direct result of inflation, rising costs of living, and chronic unemployment. Reports suggest that as many as 2,600 students in Tulsa public schools will be living in unstable housing conditions by the end of 2024. You may feel overwhelmed when you read the numbers, but for those who live in Oklahoma, they are no longer a surprise. They are part of everyday life, on the evening news, on city eviction notices, on signs across Central Park. The numbers don't lie, but they are often ignored. And in that gap, real stories are forming of people and communities forced to adapt to a life thrown off the rails of mainstream society. And those stories are the hardest to swallow, because they are not as easy to brush off as they are to turn the page. Who are the anonymous faces in the data? The answer will be revealed by looking directly at the real-life stories unfolding in the heart of Oklahoma, where every tent is an unheard indictment.
Number 5.
The shapes of crisis. You don't have to travel far to see the faces of Oklahoma's homeless crisis. They are no longer just a fleeting image on the news, but a part of street life, tent encampments, downtown parks, and even upscale shopping streets. These people don't represent a single demographic. They represent a diverse spectrum of marginalized people. At the center of the crisis are African Americans, who make up 30% of Oklahoma's homeless population, despite making up only 7% of the population. Many researchers say this is no coincidence, but a clear sign of Oklahoma's legacy of racism. The tent encampments of North Tulsa, once the heart of the Black community, are now no man's land, where people have formed small support networks to survive. The faces of old age are also growing. From 2024 to early 2025, the number of people over 65 who are homeless will increase by nearly 35%. Many people on fixed welfare benefits cannot keep up with the rising costs of housing, medical care, and living expenses. They have no choice but to live in their cars or in riverside encampments that were once considered off-limits in the city. At the opposite end of the age spectrum are hundreds of homeless teenagers, many as young as 15 or 16. According to statistics in Tulsa, 50% of homeless children have experienced at least one expulsion from shelters or institutional care centers due to overcrowding. Veterans cannot be ignored either. While assistance programs for them have helped reduce homelessness among this group, hundreds of former soldiers remain lost in the cities they once fought to protect. Perhaps no one can remember every face sleeping under a tattered tent on the edge of the city, but that feeling of suffocation and helplessness when standing in the bright lights of the city, knowing that behind that mask is a parallel world, is not easy to forget. a world without papers or addresses, where conventional rules become meaningless and people are forced to invent their own principles of survival. Not because they want to, but because society has cleverly pushed them to the edge, where there is no choice but to learn to survive in the dark. That's Oklahoma. The Oklahoma that few people want to talk about. Where the faces of the homeless tell not only the story of missing dollars and foreclosed homes, but also the most painful indictment of what the city chooses to ignore. Those faces, those eyes you might catch a glimpse of on the evening news. But how many people actually stop for more than a few seconds? How long will these real-life stories be forgotten? And the hardest question of all, how long will it be before we have the courage to look at them not as dry numbers on a report, but as real people living, breathing and struggling against the cruel indifference of a society that is so quick to turn its back? And amid all the tragedy, tourism, the city's image and major events still thrive. But behind the curtain of the festival, there is an inevitable collision between two worlds that overlap each day.
Number 6.
The collision of two worlds. The billboards of Oklahoma City and Tulsa often feature clean boulevards, colorful festivals, and bustling sporting events. But beneath the tourist attractions lies a different reality. The homeless are no longer on the margins of tourist centers. They are an integral part of the urban landscape. This makes the collision of the two worlds all the more stark and uncomfortable. Large cultural events such as indigenous festivals often become the focus of conflict. On one side are homeless people, many of whom are indigenous, who see the festival grounds as temporary shelters. On the other side are event organizers concerned about the impact on their image and safety. These tensions are never fully resolved, but rather build up until they erupt into small-scale clashes or forced relocation campaigns. In this context, another trend has emerged: dark tourism. Tours of Oklahoma's dark side are organized underground, where visitors are led through tent camps and told forgotten stories. Some groups of curious tourists visit abandoned places like Peacher or the Skirvin Hilton, where ghost stories are woven from urban legends. For these tourists, Oklahoma's dark side becomes an unusual attraction. But for many local residents, especially the homeless, the presence of such tours only adds to the feeling of being exploited, turned into entertainment for outsiders. These clashes are not limited to the holiday season or downtown areas. They seep into travel reports and angry comments on travel forums, where visitors share their indigenous cultural experiences while complaining about the unease they feel when passing through tent encampments. The conflict leaves Oklahoma caught between two conflicting images, and so far the city has not found a way to bridge them. While officials debate long-term solutions, those living on the margins must adapt every day to the overwhelming presence of the tourism industry. They become invisible in souvenir photos and promotional videos, but they are an integral part of the city's story.
Number 7.
System failure. Oklahoma is full of councils, budgets, initiatives, and high-profile press conferences about homelessness. But beneath the thick layer of information lies a system that is slowly slipping out of control. The budget numbers that are trumpeted in the media are little more than a thin band-aid slapped on a festering wound that has been there for years. The city is committed to spending $10 million in 2024 on housing and homelessness prevention programs. But independent investigations have found that at least 15% of that money has gone to ancillary items that have little to do with homelessness, from conferences and events to in-house training programs. Ironically, the cost of these lavish meetings is many times higher than the budget directly supporting tents and emergency shelters. Tulsa, the state's second-largest city, is not immune to the same pattern of failure. Official shelters can only meet about 20% of demand. Nonprofits like the Tulsa Day Center are overwhelmed, serving more than 500 people a day, while resources are dwindling due to a lack of steady funding. Many workers at the charities describe feeling like they are sailing in rough seas with a leaky bucket. Alongside this is an increasingly aggressive police presence. Oklahoma City recorded more than 1,500 arrests of homeless people in 2024, mostly for administrative offenses related to illegal camping, disorderly assembly, or trespassing on public property. But more worryingly, allegations of excessive force in the performance of their duties are increasing, causing the police to become distant and even confrontational in the eyes of the community. In Oklahoma, there is no debate about whether we are facing a crisis. The question is whether the current system is capable of responding or has completely failed in the face of the complexity, antiquity, and deep-rootedness of the problem. And while answers remain elusive, the homeless population continues to grow. Tent camps swell, empty homes proliferate, and news conferences announce new initiatives. But as Oklahoma's history has shown, these initiatives may be just a blip on a picture that has been cracked for too long.
Number 8.
Oklahoma of the future. In Oklahoma, current data suggest that housing policy inertia has become a systemic problem. Expert projections suggest 3 major future developments, each of which directly reflects the decisions or lack of decisions of policymakers. On the positive side, housing reform programs can deliver on their promises. Initiatives like the Key to Home Partnership, when expanded and combined with the involvement of local businesses and social organizations, are expected to reduce chronic homelessness by up to 30% within 5 years. Low-cost housing models that integrate mental health and substance abuse services, which have proven effective in other states, can also help Oklahoma gradually control the problem. However, at the current pace of implementation, many experts assess the possibility of achieving this goal as quite limited. The more worrying risk is that homelessness will continue to increase, along with the trend of criminalizing tent areas and cutting Social Security budgets. In this scenario, the total homeless population in Oklahoma could reach 12,000 by 2030. The tent areas will increasingly stabilize as semi-permanent communities separate from the rest of the city, gradually forming areas that are erased from official maps, but clearly present in real life. There is also the possibility that things will continue to stagnate. In that case, homelessness will not explode into a national crisis, but there will also be no significant positive change. In this context, a potential trend is the rise of dark tourism, where forgotten areas become attractive destinations for tourists who want to explore the darker side of modern society. Whatever the outcome, analysts agree, on one point, Oklahoma is too deep into the housing crisis to easily turn around. The choices made in the next few years will not only affect the fate of thousands of homeless people, but will also shape the rest of America's perception of Oklahoma as an example of bold change or as a modern-day social wound that has yet to heal.
Number 9.
Final stop. When a city can't hide its dark side, sometimes that dark side becomes a commercial product. In Oklahoma, the trend of dark tourism is no longer underground, but is becoming more openly accepted. Tours of forgotten sites, ghost towns like Pitcher, and haunted landmarks like the Skirvin Hilton Hotel are increasingly attracting visitors who want to learn about the dark side of American urban development. But it's not just historical sites or urban legends. Tent camps like the Jungle in Oklahoma City and Archer Street along the Tulsa River have begun to become unusual destinations. A handful of informal tour groups promote routes that take visitors through these areas, telling stories of economic collapse and communities living on the margins of the system. For some, it's a way to confront a harsh reality they believe society needs to face. But for many locals, especially the homeless community, such tours just leave them feeling exploited, turned into subjects for social media check-in photos. Oklahoma is facing a difficult question. Will old wounds truly become lessons for the next generation? Or will they be turned into cheap sightseeing tours, where pain is framed behind safety glass? Will people still have the courage to look at those memories as a living part of the present, Or will they easily become a show for the amusement of those who are just passing by? While tourist buses continue to flock to haunted spots, the people who live in those areas still face a life that no tour can truly recreate.
Number 10.
Oklahoma has shown that a social crisis is never caused by a single factor. It is the sum of decades of mistakes, of easy choices of indifference that has been deeply rooted in the communities that have been affected. The tent encampments that have sprung up in our cities are not just a symptom of poverty, but also an indictment of how Oklahoma has dealt with or avoided historical wounds that have never been healed. There is no single group, class, or government to blame. It is the collective indifference, the tacit acceptance that homelessness is a reality to be hidden, that has turned Oklahoma into a dangerous example. Here, any patchwork of budgets or short-term initiatives only perpetuates the vicious cycle. In this context, Oklahoma becomes a mirror for the rest of America. What is happening here may be the premise for new trends in urbanization, where people use administrative measures to erase the presence of people who do not fit into the established development picture. An Oklahoma framed by black tourism, by rampant encampments, by deportation and criminalization directives, is not only a failure of this city, but also a collective failure of modern society. What Oklahoma is exposing is not just a local crisis. It is a wake-up call that every city should heed before the dark side spills out of the tent encampments and into neighborhoods once considered safe. Oklahoma is more than just a dry number. It is a mirror that reflects the dark corners that any city can find itself in. The stories you have just followed may not be easy to hear or swallow, but sometimes only those thorny truths force us to stop and take a closer look at the social picture around us. If today's journey has touched a corner of your thoughts about Oklahoma, about the people living quietly on the edge of light, NVL Travel Documentary would love to have you join us. Share a like, or simply leaving a few lines of feedback is enough to help these stories be heard more widely, more truthfully, because each perspective is always an important piece of the whole picture.